Hey, welcome back to Inside the Huddle. We were talking some Michigan State coaching search in the first hour. I want to transition a little bit here. And Brandon, Michigan has been looking for, Michigan always keeps its eye on the transfer portal like any good school does nowadays. They haven't gotten to the point, we haven't had this massive scale where they're getting so many kids transferring, because of, eligibility issues, where teams are picking up 5, 6, 7 guys from the transfer portal. Michigan has not picked up anybody yet from this year's transfer portal, but they are looking at a couple of people, and you did an updated look at this on Wolverine Digest just yesterday. Some of the players that Michigan has supposedly been involved with, or at least be interested in, that are now leaning somewhere else, and a new name on the list. And so let's start with the new name on the list, because this is probably someone that you've actually been confirmed. You've confirmed through Michigan back channels that Michigan is interested in, and I don't even want to try to say his name.
I was waiting. I was just
okay. Hold on. I'll try. Chibuze Onwuka.
Onwuka?
Sure. Spelled Chibueze is his first name.
Chibuze, I think that's probably how I would have said
Onwuka. Defensive tackle from the Buffalo Bulls. 6 foot, 290.
Yeah, so this is going to be your classic case of a pretty good player, athletic, big in the middle that is just undersized. I mean, if when you're recruiting a guy and you're going to these camps and coaches are putting eyeballs on players and the guy is 6 foot tall, a lot of schools are like, nah, we're good. I mean, like that's just how it works. All right, so he's going to get passed over. He's going to get looked at by MAC schools, which is where he ended up at Buffalo. He spent some time at I think a community college or a local school as a wrestler, actually. So he's got like kind of an interesting background, and I'm guessing by his name. I mean, I'm making an assumption here, but you see a lot of kids like, come from another country and not have a really strong football background. I didn't dive super far into all of that about him, but he hasn't played football for very long. That much I know. Like I said, he was a wrestler, former wrestler, but he's been pretty productive. And we saw last year. I mean, a guy like Mike Dana, who came from Central Michigan, provided some really good depth for U of M. So guys that are productive at a MAC school, you don't automatically say, well, that's a MAC school, they can't play at Michigan, because we saw it. We saw it last year. So he started all 13 games last year at D-tackle, was named an All-MAC third-teamer. He was 6th on the team with 43 tackles and had 3.5 sacks from his defensive tackle position. So that's more production than any of Michigan's D-tackles had. Now, not saying he's going to come to U of M and be a starter and kick someone off the starting lineup, but he's a body, and we've talked a lot about how Michigan needs help at defensive tackle. One of the other guys on this list, Mike Williams from Stanford, had recently committed to Southern Methodist. So this is kind of like, okay, well, that was a pretty serious target. Jim Harbaugh and Sean Nua, the defensive line coach for Michigan, were slated to meet with him. I have not confirmed if that actually happened. Before Michigan's bowl game, Mike Williams was pretty open. He was talking back and forth with me about after the bowl game, I'm going to sit down with Michigan, going to find out what's going on. Once the bowl game was over, I reached back out and he kind of went quiet. That's usually a sign, honestly. Yeah. And it played out that way because he committed to SMU last week.
Yeah, Mike Williams, 6'2", 290, just slightly bigger than Onwuka from the Buffalo Bulls here. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've said repeatedly, when we looked at this list, Javon Swan was defensive tackle from Stanford, a couple other players we'll go through here in a second, but you weren't necessarily going to get a guy who comes in and starts right away and is an impact all Big Ten first-team conference performer.
It's not really what you're looking for, honestly. I mean, it's really hard to find that guy, but then I don't think you don't need that guy.
Ideally, you wanted another Mike Dana, as you said.
Sure.
You referenced him earlier. You want a guy who can be in your rotation, who can be in your two deep, because if all goes according to plan, it's Chris Hinton, the rising sophomore, who's over 300 pounds. It's Carlo Kemp next to him, or, Mozzie Smith, Donovan Jeter, finding a way to blossom after no-show seasons for the Wolverines in 2019. So if you can get a guy in here who could come in, I mean, again, I talk about it a lot. 2015, 16, 17, 18, the strength of that Michigan defense has always been the defensive line, and has always been the rotation that they've been able to have, where they've been able to go too deep across the board, getting 8 or 9 guys in there. They didn't have that this past season, where really the only backup they truly trusted was Mike Dana as the 5th person coming in. So if they can bring someone like this in, and they have the scholarships available to do so, you know, at the very least, you get a good backup who can spell some minutes here and there. At best, you get a playmaker who pushes Carlo Kemp or Chris Hinton to be the starting defensive tackle.
Yeah, and there could be some philosophy change there too. I mean, Sean Newell was in his first year as the D-line coach. I mean, I'm sure some of it was dictated by bodies and guys who were ready to play. But Greg Madison was really liberal with rotations. He just brought a lot of guys in. He rarely kept guys in for more than a couple of plays. He always wanted fresh legs and guys who were, ready to go and give 100%. I mean, with Sean Newell, we didn't quite see it as much. But again, it probably was more because of just a lack of guys to insert. But different coaches have different approaches. I mean, maybe Sean Newell's like, I like these 4 guys. I want them in there way more than everybody else. They have different packages. We talked about the Cheetah and the NASCAR package. So there's a lot of different reasons why guys rotate in or out. But, I mean, when you look at the depth chart and you just named it, it's really just a couple of guys. And some of them have never really played. I mean, did Mozzie Smith play a snap?
He played
like
in one game a year ago.
And same thing with Jeter. I mean, he was in there very rarely. So those are guys that just didn't play. So really you have a rising true sophomore in Chris Hinton who didn't play a lot till the last 2 or 3 games of the year. And even then he wasn't on the field like all the time. Mm-hmm. And Carlo Kemp, who is a little undersized in his own right. So getting another body in there, somebody who's been productive, albeit in the MAC, certainly doesn't hurt. And again, we saw it with Dana. So there's a recent occurrence of this being very, very helpful, depending on the kind of guy that you can get.
All right, from your grade transfer article on WolverineDigest.com right now, as you mentioned, Michael Williams is off the table. He's going to SMU. Xavier Kelly, who is the big defensive tackle from Clemson, 6'4", 305. We discussed him a little bit last week, and it seems to be trending pretty strongly in the direction of another Southern school, I should say.
Yeah, Arkansas kind of seems to be the name most associated with him, and he did take an official visit there. He's a pretty quiet kid, I think. I've reached out a couple times. I think I looked back and had talked to him just once or twice maybe as a recruit coming out of high school. Just not a super outspoken guy, but took an official to Arkansas a little over a week ago. Again, kind of speaking to how much he says, tweeted out, great visit. That's all he put. So just doesn't say a lot, and I haven't heard from him directly, but as far as I know, he doesn't have any other visits scheduled. So while I think he might be the best option at that defensive tackle spot, based on his size, based on the athleticism that I know he has, because I remember it being a huge topic of discussion when he was coming out of high school. He was a DN in high school. He's packed on, I think, man, he's had to have put on more than 50 pounds because he wasn't anywhere close to 300 coming out of high school, and now he's 305. But just never really found a role at Clemson. But obviously a talented kid, went to one of the most talent-laden programs in the country, and just couldn't quite find the field. But I mean, if you're looking at it on paper, based on his recruiting rankings, his size, his combination of athleticism and strength, he looks like a guy that I'd be like, man, why not a little bit more pursuit? And maybe there is more pursuit on Michigan's end in the back rooms, and we just don't know. But he also has roots in Detroit, so there's a connection there. And he was down to Michigan or Alabama, it seemed like, in his recruiting process before he picked Clemson. So just keeping an eye on him, but Arkansas is the strong name with him. All
right, and there's 2 other names I want to ask you about. Nigel Knott, the cornerback from Alabama, who I think in your first update just kind of some of these things is reading the tea leaves, and saying like, hey, there's a number of current Michigan assistant coaches who are following him on Twitter. Same with the tight end from Miami, Brian Polendi. But it appears, at least with Polendi, that maybe some of the smaller schools make a little more sense for him right now, while not could end up at a Power 5, but it's probably not Michigan.
Yeah, these are just, I mean, again, going through the transfer portal list and kind of seeing who is a potential guy to keep an eye on. I had some pretty loose parameters, being they had to have an offer. I mean, if Michigan didn't recruit him at all coming out of high school, I don't know how much sense it makes to look at him. I mean, then again, though, you look at a guy like Dana, but there's some form of connection. He was a local guy, came from Warren De La Salle, big-time program in high school, played at Central Michigan, so has always been around the program, and knew Sharon Moore very well, who came from CMU to U of M. So if there wasn't an offer, like in the case of Jovan Swan, who you brought up earlier, he was a local kid as well, Indiana, not Michigan, but a Midwest kid, was born in Michigan though and was a diehard Michigan fan and had more interest in Michigan than any other program, but he didn't have an offer out of high school. But to me, that's a kid worth paying attention to because there was some level of interest at some point. So across the board, these guys have had some form of connection to U of M, and that's why they're on the list. But yeah, I mean, Palendi, the type of schools that are following him, it just doesn't look like he's going to garner that big interest.
Yeah.
Even though it is confirmed that Michigan's keeping an eye on him, and the same thing with Knott. Palendi's kind of interesting. He was born in Oregon and grew up like a huge Ducks fan, but then he moved to Texas and finished his high school career there, and then he committed to Miami. Like, it's just kind of a, sometimes you look at a kid's background and where they're from, and that dictates where they end up transferring. Kind of hard to do with him.
Well, you asked me just recently, how long should you keep this story going and updating it? And here the two big things is after signing day, I think there's a conversation that probably takes place with a lot of these guys, or they can even see the writing on the wall. Hey, they signed 3 tight ends, and I'm a tight end, and I haven't played a whole lot. I'm going to enter the transfer portal. So that is a conversation that can take place either with the coaching staff and the player, or just the player notices it on his own.
Real quick on that too, Palendi and Knott both were they didn't do anything in their careers at Miami and Alabama respectively. Palendi dealt with some injuries, or depth chart got passed up like you're talking about. He had 1 catch for 14 yards his whole career.
So I mean, again, you're not necessarily getting a home run guy. I think what intrigues me more so than an Xavier Kelly from Clemson and Nigel Knott from Alabama, someone that had maybe high 4-star, 5-star talent, is someone like the Buffalo kid who, like Mike Dana, and this is what we've talked about with the transfer portal in the last week or so, is if they were to adopt the Jim Harbaugh Michigan rule where you get immediate eligibility your first time through, I think what you'd see a lot of Mid-American Conference and Group of 5 kids that after 3 years or 2 years they've established themselves, they leave for a bigger program. And so when I'm looking at this, I would keep an eye on all the kids coming out of the MAC and that go through spring ball a little bit too, and say, hey, you know what? I'm graduating this year, and I just want to keep my options open. I'm going to look at another school. So I think this is an ongoing. I think if you get to early summer and the kid hasn't announced yet that he's transferring, I think that's where you can kind of drop it, because then you're talking about summer term. I don't know. I think, generally speaking, go through February, go through March, go through spring ball, see how that plays out into May, and then it's the transfer portal just becomes the backseat for a while.
Yeah, and we talked about that. You mentioned signing day is kind of one little hurdle to pay attention to in terms of depth chart and who's being brought in. Spring football, certainly. I mean, the coaches actually get a chance to see guys play again for maybe it's their third or fourth year in the graduate transfer situation, and then graduation I think would play a role too. See who's being asked back for a 5th year or who's not. So there's kind of this transfer portal stuff is still pretty new. I mean, we're starting to see it work in different ways for different schools, but I think there's some natural windows where it's like, okay, this is going to be a busy period for the transfer portal. This is going to be another one. Then probably over the summer there'll be a bit of a lull, and then maybe you see it in the first. I mean, we saw it this past season. The first 2, 3, 4 weeks of the year, guys are playing. Like Derek King, was the starter for Houston. Played 3 or 4 weeks and then said, "No, I'm done."
Incredible.
Like that's something I don't think we envisioned happening with the transfer portal, but I think that's going to become even more common. Guys who see themselves with a different kind of future that are playing for a team that's not doing much, kind of checking out other options. I don't think that's going to become the popular route, but he was a big time player that did that. Really, the first one we've seen. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. I think it is. There's kind of a point you made though. You said in Michigan's case, anyways, they're not looking for the home run guy, but damn it if some teams aren't finding home run guys. I mean, look at the quarterbacks in the playoff.
They are. I would say this: unless you're getting a quarterback, you're rarely getting a home run.
Okay.
I think a lot of schools, when you look at it, may sign Ohio State a couple years ago, grab the offensive center. We mentioned Devray Hamilton going to Duke. He could be a home run for the Blue Devils.
Speaking of Duke, they have now landed Devray Hamilton, the offensive tackle who Michigan, I think, should and could have been interested in. He was a former Michigan commit before he committed to Stanford. Chase Bryce, big-time quarterback who just was at Clemson and behind amazing talent. And Jamarick Woods, former starter for Michigan, who started a couple games at safety, all have picked Duke. So they're obviously they're looking for a player.
Yeah, they could benefit from it. But other than quarterbacks, how many major home run hires. I think you're starting to see it a little bit with wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen some guys move on to other programs and make a big impact. And maybe it'll start trickling down a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. But for the most part, no one's getting home run hires other than the quarterback position. And Michigan, when you look at their roster, and we've talked about it a lot, defensive tackle is their biggest weakness. Now, I've said that I thought that they should have been in the market for a KJ Costello type of quarterback. It doesn't hurt to go out there and bring one more guy into the mix, especially when you see the success that all these quarterbacks are having as grad transfers or just regular transfers in the college football playoff. But no, I think you're hitting on one spot. You bring in depth guys at a place like Michigan at every other spot.
So quick shout out real quick, a revisit to our college fantasy football season. Miz grabbed Rico Bussey Jr. during week 1. He scored 23.6 points, wide receiver, because you mentioned the wide receivers. Grad transfer. Talented kid, was at North Texas, probably one of those situations where, damn, I'm at North Texas, I'm better than all these dudes. And now he's on the transfer portal market.
Guys like that are
immediately
interesting
eligible
to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Guys like that are very interesting to keep an eye on because they've broken out somewhere else and because they're looking to trade up. A lot of guys are not looking to trade up. They're just looking to get out of a bad situation where they've lost any chance of playing time for a better situation. Someone like that, someone like the Buffalo Bills player here, Onwuku, is looking to trade up a little bit.
Former starting quarterback from Maryland, Tyrell Pegram, also a graduate transfer as of a couple days ago. So there are some. It's. I don't think there's a blanket statement. I think there's a lot of very unique situations. Guys that are like you said, looking to move up. Hey, I'm better than everybody I'm at. Let me go to a bigger school, get on the map. Improve my NFL stock or whatever the case may be. Guys in a bad situation, passed over on the depth chart, wanting to be a starter. There's a lot of different reasons. Program crumbling a little bit. I mean, we saw, I don't know how many guys leaving Stanford. I mean, it was like every other day a new guy was in the transfer portal.
We'll see if people end up leaving Michigan State after everything that's going on there, too. All right, when we come back, True False Tuesday, sponsored by Line Chiropractic. This Inside the Huddle on Sports Talk 1050, WTK to Ticket.